Hi Thomas, how you doing, mate?
Hello, Ian. I'm great, thank you.
Good boy.
Good, good. You're looking well, mate. I like that t-shirt. That's cool.
That's Def
Def
Leppard.
Leppard.
Hysteria, yeah.
Excellent.
Hi guys, welcome to Wild Vlogs, where we'll talk about all things wildlife and all things filmmaking. And today, well, it's a very special vlog today because I've got with me one of my friends from our misspent youth, and that's Ian Perks. Ian Perks is a raptor expert, a master tree climber, fantastic conservationist, and also a formidable part of the Roy Dennis Foundation team. So thanks very much, Ian, for joining me. Thank you for doing this.
No worries. Welcome. Happy to be here, Simon.
Excellent. First off, how's lockdown for you?
Yeah, probably like for a lot of folk, it's kind of, the novelty's worn off a wee bit, I guess. We've got two kids at home. We're homeschooling them. It's fine, we're getting through. It's not a bother. We're lucky to live in the Highlands where we've got loads of fresh air and space. So our daily dose of exercise takes us to some lovely places. But yeah, I think we're doing fine. We're just getting through it, just getting through it.
Let's explain just briefly where you are. You're right in the beginnings of, is it Findhorn or Findhorn? How do they pronounce it?
So yeah, we live on the River Findhorn, which runs up into the Monolith Hills, which are a big part of the Highland landscape. So we're slightly further north than the Cairngorms. Kind of halfway in between Inverness and the Cairngorms National Park, I suppose you'd say. Yeah, so we're lucky. We're quite high up, over 1,000 feet here in altitude. But today it's glorious, warm, sunny weather. So we don't get that very often, but it's really nice. So yeah, we're in a nice spot. We've got lots of nature around us. We've got lots of walks to do, although obviously we're limited at the moment. But it's a lovely place to be.
Sure, I'm sure quite a few viewers now won't be too envious, mate, about where you are. In their small confines. So yeah, I guess the most publicised element of your work recently has been the white-tailed eagles released on the Isle of Wight. An amazing thing visually, what a spectacle! And I know since its inception and its launch, would have been June? Was it June, July last year?
Yeah, so we started climbing the trees to get the chicks in June, yeah, and then the birds were actually released from the pens in August last year, yeah.
Wow, so a massive response. I often look at Roy's or the Foundation's tweets and just the amount of people, the amount of hits that gets. But I mean, I suppose the leading question is, how was this conceived initially? How and why? There's another big question that people often ask. How and why the Isle of Wight for white-tailed eagles?
So, I mean, obviously the brains behind the whole project was Roy himself, Roy Dennis. So it's his baby, very much his baby. I'm lucky to help out, but Roy conceived it, and I suppose the main reason why the Isle of Wight was selected was because that was the last known breeding location for the birds before they became extinct in England. So it seemed like a very choice place to do it. Obviously, it's got good access to food. That's a really important thing for the birds because they need to feed. So another good reason to choose that part of the world is that there's really, really ample supplies of food. There's also good areas where there are quiet bits and pieces where they can go to get some respite. You've got the New Forest, which is quite close, which would be good for roosting. So geographically and in terms of the food supply, it's a really good spot, but also emotionally, it's a really nice thing because it was where they last bred. So you kind of roll those two things together, and it's a part of the world that is very close to Roy because he grew up around that part. He's from Hampshire originally and grew up, birding on that part of the world. So he knows it really well. And I guess growing up as a kid, he would have, would have wished he could have seen birds like that down there. So I guess it's a mixture of, bringing back what's lost in terms of the last known location, but mainly that the spot is just fantastic for these birds. It's a habitat that they will just thrive in. Lots of food, lots of seabirds, lots of fish, suitable nesting locations in the future when the project sort of gathers speed and there's more and more birds down there. It just ticks all the boxes, really. And obviously another part of it was getting local people on board, and that was done via Roy and Tim early on in terms of getting the local people down there to get involved and to have their views heard. And it was discovered that the vast majority of people on the Isle of Wight were supportive and wanted these birds back. So you kind of roll all those things into one, and it just becomes the spot, really, and that's why it was chosen.
Sure.
Yeah.
For those that don't know Roy Dennis, a little bit of research would do them well, I suppose. An outstanding figure in raptor conservation over many, many decades. And you mentioned this is like a legacy, this last release from his childhood place, the Isle of Wight, and here we see him in his senior years. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, but what a thing to happen, nearing the end of this legacy that he's leaving.
Absolutely. I mean, a truly inspirational figure in UK wildlife. I mean, it has to be said. For me, I remember when I first got into birds and wildlife, watching a BBC documentary with Roy, sitting on the side of Loch Garten, talking about how he moved up from England to the Highlands to get involved in nature, and talking about this massive amount of work that he'd achieved and done in the Highlands, and he was just a really inspirational figure. And at that time, when I was back in the Midlands like yourself, I didn't think I would ever get to work with someone like that. So for me to work with Roy is just a huge privilege. I mean, he's like a father figure to me and others, I think, in conservation and in what he's achieved, not just because of the amount he's achieved, but the way he does it. He's hands-on and he gets stuff done, and that's always been a real driver for me and an inspiration for me. Is someone who doesn't talk, who doesn't sort of beat around the bush. He gets the work done, he does it, and that, as you can see with this project, that's what's happened. Roy and Tim and myself, Fraser, involved in the project, the work's been done and the birds are there, and that's what makes a difference. Because sometimes conservation can be a little bit of a talking shop. Things just go around in circles. Sure. And people have really good views and they've got strong opinions, but what actually gets done? And for me, Roy is he's an inspirational person, really. So I feel very blessed to work with him. And he is, approaching the end of his life. I think that's fair to say. Roy will be 80 this year. This project is not so much a swan song, because I think Roy's got many, many years left in him as a committed and driven conservationist. But it would be very, very fitting to get breeding white-tailed eagles on the south coast where Roy comes from, in the next few years, and I'm sure that will happen.
Fantastic. Back to the eagles themselves. Then you said about this location, the Isle of Wight, not only being the last recorded place they were known to be breeding in England, but also the fact that this also holds a lot of resources for food for them. But I know initially, during the first part of their life, their food isn't necessarily caught. It's mainly carrion. Is that right? They tend to find carrion and live off carrion. Is that for over a year even?
They're adaptable. I think that's the thing to say. They will certainly take carrion. One of the birds that was released down there was regularly eating carrion on a beach on the Isle of Wight. Yeah, they are adaptable species, and they will eat carrion a lot, particularly young birds. They'll turn their hand to everything. They are, they're not a strict. Thinking about another species, we work close with ospreys, who, they've literally got that one food source. They eat fish, and that's what they eat. White-tailed eagles will turn their hand to things, and carrion will form a big part of their diet. Obviously, when you get into breeding birds and they're trying to, if they have young on nests, they won't be eating carrion. They'll be taking live prey. Again, there's a surfeit of that down there. So yeah, they are adaptable things, and they'll turn their hand to stuff and they'll adapt to what's around them. I think that's key to say about these species. They don't just have one type of prey that they will go out of their way to find. They'll look around them and work out what's in the habitat and take that food source.
Sure.
An example being
they're a fish eagle in the purest sense, but they're not a fish eagle when it comes to prey. They will take pretty much anything they can get.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, because the term that we use, in the guidebooks is white-tailed eagle. I know a lot of people prefer sea eagle as the term.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I kind of flip between the two, really. But actually, if you look at the distribution of the birds, they are mainly a coastal species in Europe, that's fair to say. But there are also birds that are not at all coastal, living inland. on lakes, in parts of Central Europe. But equally, there's now 1 or 2 pairs in Scotland that are landlocked and only feeding on terrestrial prey. They're not eating fish at all. They're eating what's near to them, which in that case is things like hare, rabbit, and birds that are around them. So, yeah, they'll turn their hand to different things. And I think that's, to their credit, and what makes them a really good species to reintroduce.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because they will adapt and they will work out what's around them and quickly, change their hand. So, I think it's an inspiring story, but equally I think it's one that I don't think anyone would have got started with if we didn't think it would succeed. And I think knowing these birds the way they are, I think they're just a brilliant species, and I think they will succeed in what they're doing, and we're already seeing that with the ones that were released last year.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, the previous question was kind of a leading question, I guess, because I know that one of the birds, I don't know if it still is in Oxfordshire, but I know that a lot of the birds have wandered. That actually brings me to another question, which I'll come to shortly. But I heard about the Oxfordshire bird who had tallied itself with a few red kites. I'm not sure the red kites were too happy about it, but it was following them around because obviously these red kites were experts at finding carrion. And then once these kites had found a source of carrion, it just mobbed them out of the way and took the carrion off them, which I thought, I mean, you couldn't get more adaptable than that, could you? Finding a carrion source species and then absolutely mobbing it whenever it located any food source, which was it's hilarious to think of, this flying barn door just taking over.
That's right, yeah. Well, what a sight would have been for people in that part of the world, yeah. But you're certainly right to say that the birds do move around. Young birds will move, they will move, wander. That's just in their nature to do that. But what will happen is once they become sexually mature, you'll tend to find that they will return back to the place they fledged from. Not necessarily exactly to the spot, but within a pretty close proximity to it. So these birds may well spend a couple of years wandering around while they mature, learn how to feed, maybe find other eagles that are kicking around. But eventually when they are sexually mature, which will be 3 or 4 years old, they should return back to that sort of natal site. So we would expect the birds over time, with the release being phased over 5 years or so, that you will slowly see a gradual return of mature birds, hopefully to the Isle of Wight region, and when they will then start to nest. So, but yeah, they do travel miles. I mean, we had satellite tagged birds from birds that I worked up with in the Highlands, Central Highlands, and the young birds would go for sometimes hundreds of miles, hundreds of miles of flight, over a few days or whatever. What are they doing? Who knows? It's fascinating to think what's going through their minds, isn't it? Sure, what drives them to do it? Is it just a chemical, biological impulse? Are they honing their skills? Are they fixing the landscape? Who knows what these birds are doing? But they do it, and it's very common for these birds to move long distances. I think you talked on a previous blog about one bird in particular that went quite a way out of its normal routine, went a long distance away.
Sure.
So they've got this thing in them where they will move around. It's fascinating, but
well, that leads me on to. Sorry, carry on.
The honest truth is, I guess we don't probably know the real reasons do we, what birds do it so much, but they certainly do. There may well be some genetic reasons as well. Dispersal, obviously, and genetic mixing will be a part of the picture, but lots going on with these birds, and equally, I guess, lots to learn, which will make this project so fascinating in the future for everyone, be they an ornithologist or just a casual bird watcher in England, to watch this story develop.
Absolutely. Well, that default for trying to avoid genetic concentrations, they've got no fear of that at the moment, have they? They've got a pretty big piece of land for themselves. But it leads me on to a question from a guy called Ian Phillips, who's one of my fellow YouTubers. He said, obviously with the releases of the white-tailed eagles in the UK, what's next for them?
So certainly the projects for the Isle of Wight has got more releases scheduled. There's a total of 60 birds going to be moved. 60. Obviously COVID-19 notwithstanding, that's throwing a potential spanner in everybody's work this year. But certainly the license allows for 60 birds over a period of 5 years. So that in this initial project should see hopefully up to 60 birds moved, and those birds will do what they'll do. And I think over time we would expect, as I said earlier, those birds eventually to start breeding. That's the plan. And with 60 birds down there should be enough. But the other thing to remember about what might happen is it might not just be our birds that we release that end up breeding, because there are birds close by. For example, in the Netherlands, There's 10 or more pairs there. There's 100 pairs in Denmark. Some of these young birds will do what we were just describing. They'll move around.
Sure.
And it could well be that just the presence of other white-tailed eagles on the south coast of England might draw in some birds from Europe,
sure,
who will then breed, which is good for genetic mixing, and it makes the population more robust. So I guess the future is unknown at the moment, but I think it's probably quite exciting, and as I said, interesting to know what will happen. What
sure.
Eagles tend to go where other eagles are. They'll, they will see another eagle, potentially many, many miles away, and they'll go and check it out.
They'll make the
assumptions. If we've got a population of young birds that are kicking around that area, the south of England, it could well draw in other birds. But the future for this project is very much fixed on getting these birds breeding.
But potentially your first breeding birds will coincide with your last release of chicks, possibly.
That's absolutely right. If you think about timeframes from year 1 to year 5, and the birds are sexually mature 3 or 4 years old, absolutely, you could get that situation where the last year of releasing birds coincides with hopefully the first year of breeding birds.
Wow.
Which would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
It would.
Like we say, it's all up in the air at the moment with COVID-19. Yeah. But I'm still confident. We're all just sort of watching and waiting at the moment. But that's the plan. And in terms of other birds I think everyone's watching this project now because it's such an interesting, exciting thing. Who knows what the future might hold for other parts of England? If there were landowners who were interested, if there were agencies and authorities that were interested, and more importantly, if the people in certain areas wanted these birds back, it's certainly something that can be done.
Yeah.
I think Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation, Roy and Tim have proven that this can be done. This is, in my mind, the only conservation charity working in the UK that's got this experience, that can do these projects. But that, means that we know what we're doing and we can do it. So the practicalities of doing it elsewhere in the UK are, there's no blocks to that. We can do it.
Yeah.
The question of where and if and should it happen, obviously, are much broader questions.
Sure.
For government agencies, for local people, for lots of other landowners to get involved in.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully the plan would be to demonstrate the success of what we're doing in the Isle of Wight will hopefully lead to other people saying, that project went really well and it worked, and it's brought a lot of extra tourism and a lot of interest to the Isle of Wight. We'll see. Watch this space, I guess.
Excellent. Well, personally, I think with the sort of the origins side, I think it's just fantastic to have the eagles in literally a polar opposite of the habitat that people expect them to be in. The habitat in the UK, certainly they've resided over the last 30, 40 years. I just think it's fantastic. You couldn't get more flat.
It is. It's a point I think that's kind of probably worth stressing, that the UK and particularly southern England is so heavily changed by man, by humans.
Sure.
That it's almost unrecognisable from what it would have been thousands of years ago, when humans had very little impact on the landscape. And I think sometimes we get a little bit carried away with what we see around us as being what it should be like, and expectations that seeing birds in certain habitats and thinking, well, that's where they live, and actually it might not be that case. It might be that that's where we forced them to live.
We've pigeonholed them,
taken over.
Yeah.
And they've ended up in these refugia where they can survive because there's not many humans around. Whereas actually they want to and will thrive, in many other places. So I think maybe, and that's another maybe start to this project, is maybe bursting some bubbles and exposing some myths about what wild animals can live and thrive in, let's say, the south of England, compared to what many people might expect should be there. Sure. Or what they see around them. I mean, the kites would be a good example. When you and I were growing up as kids in Birmingham, kites you had to go to Wales to see them. They were nowhere. And then obviously the reintroduction project, which was a big part, exposed that myth that they are, an upland species of Wales. Actually, no, these birds will thrive everywhere. Like they do in Europe.
Sure.
So but I think that's a really important point to hope to get people to think a little bit more about what could be around and what should be around.
Sure. Question now from Stuart Abbott, still with whitetails. He mentioned about them that he'd been surprised they'd wandered so far from the release site, and he said, "Is that disappointing?" Well, obviously, I think you've just alluded to the fact that this is natural behaviour for these birds to do this.
Absolutely.
Mysterious as it is, it's part of their dynamic, and it's what they do.
Yeah.
Are there any other plans, I guess, to release further in the UK? You've pretty much alluded to that as well, then, that there's a potential here for many sites across our island. Should there be the correct habitat and also the correct opinion, especially the correct public opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point to say that, reintroduction projects only work when local people are invested in the projects and want it to happen.
Sure.
It would be unwise to impose things on people who didn't want it. So I think that would be a very key part of whoever gets involved or wants to get involved in future reintroduction projects of eagles or whatever they think should be around them.
Sure. Very
important to get people on board. But
I've got to mention Stuart, because Stuart is self-isolating. He's one of these guys that's been told by the government he has to stay indoors. And he's doing an amazing job at the moment. He's doing a daily vlog from his garden, which I think he will admit to himself isn't the biggest garden, but every day, and he's past 30 days now of doing this daily vlog, and he's found some amazing things in this small piece of land. But he's an amazing guy, and he is an activist. He's a naturalist and an activist. Well done, Stuart. I hope that's answered your questions. This is a question from a guy called Glenn Hartwell. And it's pretty comprehensive, this question, so I'm going to read it to you as it is, verbatim in front of me. And Glenn says, so back in 1999, Dr. Martin Gorman, a senior lecturer of zoology at Aberdeen University and vice chairman of the UK Mammal Society, called for the reintroduction of wolves to the Scottish Highlands and to the English countryside in order to deal with the then 350,000 red deer damaging young trees in commercial forests. What are your thoughts on this, Ian? Do you agree with it? And what sort of time frame do you think that we'd need, or what we'd be looking at? Should it be limited, and should it be limited to wolves? I guess he's thinking about possibilities with lynx, maybe, and something else in rewilding. This is what we're going to call this, rewilding. So how do you feel about that, Ian?
Well, that's a very big subject,
isn't
a very, very potentially challenging subject, controversial subject. So I think with any sort of reintroductions of, we've alluded to it with the eagles, but you need to get a reintroduction project right. There needs to be enough food, enough habitat, enough security for these animals. It would not be acceptable to release animals into a habitat that would not survive. So I don't think there's any prospect of wolves, if I'm honest. This is a personal view of mine. I could talk about what I would like to see in the habitat.
Sure.
I maybe will, but in terms of the practicalities of what will happen, I would suggest that wolves will not happen in the UK in any medium term. That would be my gut feeling. Okay. I might be wrong. Others might disagree with me. Absolutely, but I would expect there to be a lot of resistance to wolves, and I wouldn't expect government agencies to approve. Now, I might be wrong. It's just a personal view. That's not to say wolves can't coexist with humans in quite, close proximity, because they do in Europe. There are many parts of Europe now where wolves are increasing in number, and they're not really that far away from some pretty major centres of human conurbations or human population.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So, there's lots of strands to this. Which one do you tug at? Can it be done? Well, of course it could be done if you had a landowner with land who wanted to do it. And public government agencies who were willing to support it. It could practically be done, it would have to be done very, very, very carefully. Would it be done, and would that political will exist? My suggestion is probably not, I guess, for wolves. So I think probably maybe I'm being overly diplomatic or not grasping the nettle fully, but I'm sitting on the fence maybe a bit, but I honestly think my gut feeling is that wolves would be very unlikely to happen. That would be my gut feeling. Now, personally, would I like to think that there are wolves around my patch here in the Highlands? Well, personally, yes, I would. But that's my personal view, and I understand that others don't agree with that. The wolf has always had this sort of undeserved reputation, hasn't it? I think written through folklore in the UK. The big bad wolf, Red Riding Hood, it always seems to get negative press. True. When actually the animals themselves are just one of the most amazing species on this planet. Intelligent, work together as teams, and provide huge benefits to any ecosystem. So, ecologically, of course, anyone would want apex predators in their ecosystems because they perform such invaluable functions that are missing in Britain. And maybe that's why some of our wildlife is in such peril, because we don't have these natural intact ecosystems. But equally, we have to be realistic about what is possible. And I just feel that maybe wolves would have too much resistance from the public, from other people who might have vested interest in this, be it the farming lobby or the gamekeeping lobby. So I can only talk about what I personally think. My gut feeling on that is that it probably won't be happening in our lifetimes, that's for sure.
Okay.
Now, of course, the world's changing rapidly. What's happening to the climate is becoming more apparent to people, I think. And I think generally the public are becoming more aware. It might be slow, but it is happening. And part of fixing the problems that we face is restoring and, getting things back to what they were, and having areas where nature can thrive to, provide and help, almost cleanse the planet. So, it's a very difficult question because it's loaded with lots of different controversial views and political views.
Sure.
And, but I can only, as I said to you, there's so many different strands. You could answer this from an ecological perspective, from a political perspective, from a farming perspective, from a wildlife watching perspective. Who wouldn't want the chance to go and try and see a wolf?
Yeah.
People travel to Yellowstone to see them. Well, great, you can see them in Britain, but yeah, I think it's probably unlikely.
So in terms of apex predators then, because obviously the crux of this question was somehow to deal with the enormous amounts. I know I'm sure it's over 350,000 now, is it, from the Highlands for red deer counts? Or was that sort of the plateaued peak? Do you know the numbers of red deer right now up there? About?
I think one of the problems with red deer is they are quite difficult to count.
Right, sure, okay.
Surveys have been used, and on a lot of the landscape up here, which, as we mentioned, is hugely altered. It's not a natural habitat at all. Very, very, very open and lacking in trees.
Yeah,
big areas.
That's definitely a key point to make. If we just pause it there, because once we get this out of the way, so one thing I always tell people I speak to is that we've been brought up in the last 250 years on this shortbread tin image of the 12-pointer stag. And this kind of barren, rocky landscape behind him, and this is all we've known. But this really is a deconstructed landscape, isn't it? Since the Industrial Revolution, this prior to that, and I think you had some documentation once you showed me, or talked about it at least, where this was the place was verging on pastoral land, pre the entry of I think it was post Highland clearances, is that right? The gentry moving in and then introducing their folly, the hunting folly of the grouse and the deer, and all this grazing aspect just destroyed the Highlands. So pre what people understand the Highlands are today, would you put it more towards like an alpine landscape, or with meadows and lush grasslands, or?
It would have been a mixture of things, but the predominance, in terms of time frame, how far back do you go? But the Caledonian forest would have covered most of the Highlands.
Sure.
So, post-glacial,
yeah,
where you initially had a glacier covering the Highlands. When that retreated, you would have got scrub coming back first. Then you would have got small trees and shrubs coming back, followed by big trees, and then pine being the backbone of that. Scots pine, alder arrived, so it would have been a mixture of these different species. But for most of that post-glacial period, the Highlands were forested. It was Caledonian forest, which would have supported wolves and deer and all sorts of things in their natural habitat.
Sure.
And since then, and this is where you get into some disagreements. Some people have got some views about what happened. My personal view is that humans completely altered it by felling all the trees, and then more latterly by, as you mentioned, bringing in sheep to graze it and to keep it as burn it, obviously, for grouse, for red grouse, so they shot. But that's a very much more recent thing. The history post-glacial is more complicated than that. Some people suggest that one of the reasons that Scotland became treeless was climatic. It wasn't anything to do with humans. I personally don't believe that. I think it was human-led. But there are some people out there, it is a minority, who think that. My view is that humans just rapidly altered this landscape and turned it into something that initially would have supported crofters, families with livestock,
Yeah.
And then more latterly, as you mentioned, clearances would have removed people and bigger estates formed, and it got turned over for sport in inverted commas in my mind, where you're shooting grouse, deer, etc., and fishing. So it's not natural in any sense of the word in terms of what it would be like had humans not had a hand in it. It's very, very different. And of course that leads back to the question about apex predators and the issue with deer and the big deer numbers. Red deer are in a habitat that they didn't evolve to be in. Red deer are woodland creatures. Across most of Europe, that's where they are.
Sure.
They evolved in woodland, but of course all the woodland's gone, and they've kind of been. They are, I suppose, adapting to an open habitat. But that means that they're much more exposed, particularly in winter. So a lot of deer are fed, to maintain their health and nutrition over the winter because they are so exposed. And obviously the numbers are elevated because to shoot a number of stags that you might want, you need quite a big pool of animals. So, deer numbers, I don't think there's any question now across conservation that deer numbers are too high in parts of Scotland. How do you address that is, of course, a more nuanced question. Obviously, humans address that because deer are shot and cold. But, what should the number be? How should the land be used? Much, much, much broader questions that you and I could chew the fat about it and have some really interesting views. They are very big questions to do with land use in Scotland that I guess will be entertaining the people at the very top of government and the very top of big organisations, people who own land, people who want to conserve land, etc., etc. But it is a challenge. And deer numbers, there are parts of Scotland now where deer numbers are being reduced. If you think about Cairngorms and the Cairngorms Connect project, where there's joined up thinking over 60,000 hectares of land,
sure,
where there's a concerted effort to reduce deer numbers to encourage tree regeneration. So it's not as sort of blanket as it has been in the past, where there are now, estates and big parts of the country that are looking to reduce deer numbers. And I suppose going back to wolves, maybe one of the things that you might suggest, there's maybe a theory that if you had a wolf pack in a certain area, they'd kill all the deer. Well, they clearly wouldn't. They only need a certain amount of food to survive.
Yeah.
And if you had, let's say thousands of deer on a place, well, they're not going to eat all those 1,000 deer, are they? They're not. They're clearly not. So, but they might move them around. They might change where they go. They might have a different impact on what happens. So, these questions are really complicated. They're fascinating, aren't they? But I certainly wouldn't want to advocate any particular view being right or wrong. Everyone's got a view, and they're equally valid.
Okay, so I mean, the leading candidate then right now, this has been obviously quite heavily publicised, is the lynx. And I'm working on that premise as well. You say that there's no way that the wolves or any apex predator on its own could deal with the sheer numbers of these deer, and it would be just a case of dispersal, having the deer being aware that a predator exists for one, so they wouldn't be grazing so long in one place, moving on all the time, possibly having less young for fear of predation. But I mean, I've heard from various sources, some quite astute naturalists, that they're thinking in the next 2 decades maybe for lynx. They've already crossed a few hurdles. Is that what you've heard? Is that ring true?
In terms, I don't think there's any concrete plans as yet for any sort of projects from various people, be it in the north of England or, there's a lot of talk about lynx, and I'm sure a lot of people are really interested in lynx. And like you say, it wouldn't surprise me if in some time in the next 20 years someone has a crack at it and tries to bring them over. Again, my personal view is that they are a part of this landscape and would do fantastic things for certain parts where they would fit in and where they would thrive.
Absolutely.
Thinking like Cairngorms Connect, thinking like some of the big forests in Strathspey Bay where they used to be, and maybe thinking about other places where they might be more suited initially to be being reintroduced. I personally would like to see lynx back. I think it would be fantastic. They are a predator, as we said, an apex predator. They will be helping to restructure. They will bring with them tree regeneration, no doubt. They will affect the movements of deer, particularly roe deer. I mean, we're talking about roe deer being their prey base for lynx.
Yeah, the smaller deer.
Not red deer.
Yeah.
they would very much specialise in roe deer. That seems to be what a lot of their diet is in Europe.
Yeah.
So if you do have an area of land where you've got humans stalking lots of roe deer to get tree regeneration, well, you might be able to put a lynx into that habitat. It would do the job for you and do it much better probably than humans can. I don't know about time frames in terms of when it might happen, but I would suggest that it's something that is needed. I think this, drawing along the themes of reintroducing, you talked about with eagles, there's lots of species that we know form such important parts of the ecosystem that we need them back. Time is running out. I think we all need to sort of get real with what's happening with this planet. We don't have time, and it might well be that we have to make decisions quite quickly to try and restore what's broken. And I think with things like reintroductions, not only of lynx, but things like beaver, which is obviously isn't a predator, but it's such an important ecosystem engineer, and it could change things dramatically for lots of other species.
That ripple effect.
Exactly. And so you think about things like beaver and lynx, and all these sort of apex predators, and white-tailed eagle is an apex predator in its own right.
Sure.
All these just make the system more robust and better for everybody. It's interesting. I've just been rereading J.A. Baker's book, The Peregrine. I don't know if you've read that, but it's a fantastic.
I know of it. Yeah.
So evocative, and it's written in the 60s, and he talks about, he obviously does a lot of work with peregrines and watches these birds, but also talks about the impact they have on many other species, on, the fact that they don't eat all their prey, so it means that other species will get the leftovers. The fact that he always used to find long-tailed tits nesting near pluck sites because they'd use the feathers. And it's all these little interactions that you don't see sometimes that you realise that's what predators do, and that's what all these different animals that are missing do. They make the landscape richer, and they enable other species to thrive as well. So, I'd say personally, I would love to see lynx. I think it is ripe for the habitat up here in parts of Scotland. I think it's missing and it should be back. Humans eradicated it, and I think it's our duty to put it back.
Absolutely.
And to try and reverse some of these terrible losses that we're seeing on this planet.
It's these almost innocuous small pieces of the jigsaw that have massive effects, isn't it? It's quite incredible. Right, we're coming away from rewilding now, away from the controversy, back to safe territory of birds of prey, or maybe not, because this next question, I think it's my last question actually, from a fellow YouTuber. This is Graham Barker, and Graham asks, question for Ian: does Ian think there will be any plans for a reintroduction of golden eagles to England? He says, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are none at the moment, are there?
Well, that's correct. I mean, so one thing to say is there is the South of Scotland Golden Eagle Reintroduction Project, which is happening. They have reintroduced birds to the south of Scotland, and I know that at least one of those birds did venture south into the Pennines. Okay. So, there is something that's not an introduction project into England, as your questioner asked. But would there be in the future? Again, personally, if you want my personal view, I think there should be. I think these are the things that should be looked at as part of our solutions to getting, to fixing what's broken out there. Golden eagles are very different, not very different, but a different bird to white-tailed eagles. They are very much associated with uplands. They are not as sort of wide-ranging in their habits and their abilities to turn their hand to lots of different things. They tend to be a little bit more fixed in what they want and need. But there shouldn't be any reason. Well, they should be in the north of England. There are big parts of the north of England where they should be. They were historically, and they should be back. As I'm aware of it, there are no plans for any specific England-based golden eagle projects that I know of. There may well be people working on this sort of stuff, but I don't know of anything. But if the South of Scotland Eagle project was successful, I would imagine you would no doubt see birds starting to move across the border into the north of England, into Cumbria, into the lakes maybe, who knows. But that depends on that project being successful. I know they had a few teething issues early on with that project, possibly to do with sourcing chicks, but I don't know. I've not worked on that project. I don't know the ins and outs of it. But it's certainly a project that should be supported, and I think that's part of this. Part of the key to this is getting people to support these projects, either through vocal, be it writing to your MP, just canvassing support, or direct financial contributions to some of the organisations that are trying to put these things together. So but yeah, in terms of the specifics on golden eagles, there's nothing I know of, but clearly they should be there, shouldn't they? They should be.
They should be, absolutely. Well, I'm hoping potentially for a sea change. I know generation to generation changes in people's perception of natural history, and as you've suggested, there needs to be a pretty hefty shift in people's perception of natural history, or else we're all doomed. But I think, I'm a pretty pessimistic guy, I'll put it out there, but I do believe that possibly this next generation now, especially with the likes of Greta Thunberg and all these standalone figures that represent their generation, are really going to make a change, a dramatic change, for the likes of Thomas here, and obviously with your Jessica and your Henry. So I have every hope. I think possibly 10, 20 years we might get a real shift. Fingers crossed.
I hope you're right. I really hope you're right, Simon. You do see, I see it with my two children, that they do seem to care and worry about these things a lot more than I did when I was that age.
No, same, yeah.
What's happened, it is very much more apparent to them. I hope that does carry through. I hope we can make a difference ourselves. The act of planting a tree under whose shade you'll never stand, that kind of attitude, really, that you have to make decisions and sacrifices now in order to protect the future for everybody, not just, humans, but the other animals we share this planet with. So I really hope that we are starting to see some shifts. I hope we're not forced into change by events that just get out of hand. That's my worry, that we only react when things are too late. It's very difficult to be proactive sometimes, particularly when with what's happening in the world now with disease, could take people's eye off it, but I hope it doesn't. I hope it should be part of the narrative, really, that these sort of events happen when you start messing around with wildlife and with the planet. It's not, they are linked very much so, and we need to think carefully about how we go forward from here, I would suggest. And fingers crossed that it does change. But I, like you, I do see green shoots, that I think things are changing, and not only the young generation, but also the wider public slowly are becoming more aware of what's happening and what's around them. So we can but hope.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
No worries, mate.
Speak soon.
Speak to you. Take care, mate.
Cheers, bye.
Ta-da.
Cheers, bye.
Ta-da.